Good evening, friends of the midnight hour, and welcome back. Before we step into tonight's tale, take a moment to get comfortable, breathe deeply, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love to imagine this circle of listeners stretched across the world. Tonight's story takes us to a Europe that lived with magic long before the infamous witch hunts. This was a time when charms, amulets, and whispered incantations weren't feared, but woven into daily life. So let the noise of the day drift away and join me as we explore the strange and secret world of witchcraft before the craze ever began. Long before Europe erupted into the fiery madness of witch trials, people were already quietly weaving spells into their lives, charms to heal, talismans to protect, and whispered incantations to bend fate. Magic wasn't a crime, it was survival stitched into everyday life. You close your eyes and imagine yourself not in the modern world of electricity and glowing screens, but in a medieval village where the night is darker than anything you've ever known. There are no streetlights to guide you, no hum of machines, only the cold breath of the wind and the scattered glow of fires from small thatched houses. In this world, survival is uncertain. Crops fail, children fall sick, and a single harsh winter can break a family. And in this world, you do not simply trust luck or chance. You lean on something older, something deeper, something that hums beneath the Christian prayers and sermons. You lean on charms, on whispered spells, on the little bits of everyday magic that people around you treat as naturally as drawing water from the well. If you lived then, you would have carried something small and precious on your body. Perhaps a tiny pouch sewn shut with herbs, or a knotted string, or even a carved piece of bone. These were not treasures of wealth, but treasures of survival, infused with meaning. The pouch might be filled with rosemary or rue to ward off illness, or maybe with salt, a substance so ordinary yet so powerfully protective that no evil spirit was thought to endure its touch. You would not call this witchcraft. You would simply call it wisdom. It was what your grandmother taught you, what your neighbours confirmed, what everyone knew. When the world felt unstable and God's will seemed mysterious, these little charms steadied you, gave you agency, let you feel that your hands and heart could shape destiny, even just a little. Every village had its wise figure, someone you might seek out in desperation. Maybe it was an old woman with sharp eyes and a crooked back, who knew which herbs could cool a fever or ease a difficult childbirth. Or maybe it was a man who muttered prayers in Latin he barely understood, and who also carried the reputation of being able to reverse the evil eye. You would not think of these people as witches, you would call them healers, cunning folk, or simply helpers. When your cow stopped giving milk, when your child wasted away with no clear cause, you turned to them because the priests offered prayers, but not always solutions. You might have been told by your family that the world was layered with dangers unseen. Spirits lurked at the edges of forests. The evil eye could curse you if someone looked too long with envy at what little you owned. A poorly buried body could rise to bring sickness to the living. And for all these dangers, you had defenses, little rituals so ingrained that you would not even think twice about them. You might spit over your shoulder when hearing bad news. You might hang a sprig of hawthorn over your door to keep out spirits. You might whisper a blessing over bread before breaking it, not only for gratitude but also because the act itself was protective, sacred, almost magical. If you lived then, you would have seen religion and magic weaving together, not in contradiction but in harmony. People crossed themselves as they walked past crossroads, not only for Christian devotion, but because crossroads were powerful places where spirits gathered. They might recite the Lord's Prayer backwards to undo a curse, blending holy words with magical logic. You might slip into the churchyard at night to scoop up dirt from a grave, believing it could heal or protect if used properly. Nobody thought of these practices as betraying God. Instead, you would see them as tools given by the natural world, available for human hands to use, so long as you showed respect. And you would have learned these things young, as naturally as learning to walk or speak. Your mother would warn you never to let a stranger's shadow fall across your child's cradle without making the sign of the cross. Your father might tell you to tie knots in a cord and keep it under your pillow to ward off nightmares. An older neighbour might mutter charms while working in the fields, blending prayer with rhyme, calling on saints and spirits alike. Every act was meant to tip the balance between fortune and misfortune, between health and sickness, between life and death. It was not only protection, though. Everyday magic gave hope. Imagine you planting seeds in the cold ground of early spring. You would not simply scatter them and walk away. You might whisper a charm as you covered them with soil, calling on the sun to warm them, the rain to nourish them, the saints to bless them. You might tuck in a little carved figure or bury a coin, believing that the land itself would respond to this gift. When harvest came, you would leave a few stalks uncut at the edge of the field, a silent offering to the spirits of fertility, ensuring they would bless you again the following year. Without these rituals, planting would feel like gambling. With them, it felt like partnership. And when misfortune struck, as it inevitably did, you turned again to these small acts. If a baby fell ill, you might heat iron tongs in the fire and snap them shut over the child's head, not to harm, but to cut away the sickness. If a fever refused to break, you might place bread on the child's chest and then feed it to a dog, transferring the illness to another creature. To a modern eye, these things might seem strange, even cruel, but for you, they were acts of love, desperate ways of fighting back against forces you could not see. The church might not have approved of every charm and ritual, but at this stage in history, suspicion had not yet hardened into persecution. A priest might scold you for trusting too much in herbs or muttered words, but he would also bless candles, water, or salt for you to use at home, objects that looked and felt like magical tools. The line between blessing and spell, between relic and charm, was so thin that you barely noticed it. And in truth, why should you? You did not separate the sacred from the practical. To you, it was all one fabric, woven together in the same reality. You would have walked through this world feeling that magic was not something extraordinary, but something ordinary. It was in the bread you baked, the herbs you gathered, the patterns you stitched into clothing. It was in the words you whispered to a frightened child, or the gesture you made when thunder cracked overhead. It was how you felt connected, not just to God, but to the earth, the spirits, the ancestors, the unseen threads of existence. Everyday magic was not rebellion. It was survival. It was your grandmother's whispered charm, your neighbor's ritual, your own quiet gesture when you feared the night too much. It was not the sinister image of witches flying on broomsticks, cackling with demons. That was centuries away. For you, it was simpler, humbler, more human. It was the way you lived. You live in a world where bells mark the rhythm of your days, where the church stands as the tallest building in your village, its shadow stretching over every house and field. You are baptized there, you confess your sins there, you bury your dead in its yard. The church is the center of life, but it is not the only force shaping how you think about the invisible world. Around you, people still whisper charms, wear amulets, and trust the old remedies passed down through families. And so you exist in a space where faith and magic overlap, where the holy and the folkloric blur together so seamlessly that you often cannot tell them apart. Imagine you wake in the night to the sound of your child coughing, their small body racked with fever. The priest tells you that prayer and faith in God's mercy will see you through. Yet your neighbour urges you to place a sprig of juniper beneath the child's pillow to draw out the sickness. You whisper the Lord's Prayer as you tuck the herb in, unsure whether you are doing a holy act or a forbidden one. In your mind, there is no contradiction. The words of Christ and the green of the plant are both gifts of creation. You are not summoning demons, you are caring for your child. The Church officially condemns magic, warning against any practice that calls on powers outside of God. But even within the walls of the Church, you see gestures and rituals that look a great deal like the magic you hear in the marketplace. The priest blesses water, salt, oil, and bread, turning them into objects with power to heal, to protect, to sanctify. He lifts relics, bones of saints, scraps of cloth, fragments of the true cross, and tells you they carry grace. You watch people press these relics to their bodies, hoping for a cure. You watch holy water sprinkled on the sick, on animals, on fields. If a stranger told you this was magic, you would not know how to argue. You would only know that it feels holy because it comes through the priest, through the church. The line is not in the act itself, it lies in the authority. Sometimes, even priests themselves slip across that line. You have heard of clergy who mutter secret words over charms, who write down protective verses on scraps of parchment to sell to villagers. A psalm written and carried close to the skin, a cross etched into wax and placed above a doorway, a Latin phrase phrase, whispered at a threshold. These things are indistinguishable from the charms your grandmother used, and yet if the priest does them, they become sacraments. If your neighbor does them, they become suspicious. You live in that tension, knowing that what separates prayer from spell is not always the words, but who speaks them. You hear sermons against sorcery, against invoking spirits, against trusting in old pagan practices. But you also hear sermons that encourage you to light candles before saints for protection, to make pilgrimages to holy shrines where miracles occur. You walk that path with your neighbors, carrying offerings, touching sacred images, tying rags to branches of trees near wells that have been baptized with holy names, but still feel ancient and otherworldly. You are told the power comes from God, and yet the old whispers of the land seem to echo beneath it. You cannot quite separate them, and you do not want to. To you, this blending feels natural. The church does not always crack down. Often it turns a blind eye because it knows people need these practices. Sometimes it even absorbs them. A holy procession to bless fields in spring looks suspiciously like the old fertility rituals once offered to unseen spirits of the earth. The blessing of candles at Candlemas, of herbs on certain feast days, of animals on St. Anthony's Day, all these customs look like old magic dressed in Christian robes. You do not see them as theft. You see them as continuity. The saints have stepped into the roles once held by other powers, and now you call on them instead. But you also know that suspicion lurks. If your harvest fails, and people whisper that you cursed the land, if your remedies heal too well, if your charms seem too effective, you might be summoned by the local priest for questioning. You might have to prove that your words call on God and not the devil. You might have to defend yourself by saying that the Virgin Mary, not some forest spirit, gave you the power to heal. In this world, the difference is not always about what you do, but about who you claim as the source. You live in a fragile balance, trusting that your prayers and charms can be seen as pious, not dangerous. Consider relics again. A bone said to belong to Saint Sebastian protects against plague. A vial of St. Catherine's blood cures fever. These holy objects are treasured, fought over, stolen from one church to enrich another. Pilgrims travel hundreds of miles to touch them. In practice, these relics are treated like the most powerful of talismans. And you, pressing your lips to the glass case, feel the same sense of awe you might feel when tying a protective knot of red thread. To you, the categories of religion and magic dissolve. You see only power, only protection, only the hope that something greater than yourself listens and responds. Astrology, too, creeps into this picture. Officially, the church warns against predicting the future, and yet you know that kings consult astrologers before battles, that noblewomen look to the stars before conceiving a child. Even clerics dabble, studying the heavens not to replace God, but to understand the order he has woven into the cosmos. The stars are his clock, his writing in the sky. To ignore them would feel like ignoring scripture. And so even here, the church condemns what it quietly practices, policing only when the boundaries grow too obvious. You live in a time before witch hunts dominate the imagination. For now, most of these tensions remain unresolved, suspended between tolerance and warning. You walk into church with a charm tucked under your clothing, and you cross yourself without guilt. You ask the priest to bless your fields, and you whisper your grandmother's rhyme over the seeds. You see no contradiction, because your world is not divided neatly into sacred and profane. Your world is thick with layers, all of them overlapping, all of them necessary. And perhaps this is the heart of it. You live in a reality where everything is alive with meaning. The church tells you God's power runs through relics, through sacraments, through holy water. Your neighbors tell you the same power runs through herbs, charms, and gestures. You trust both, because why would you limit yourself when the world is so dangerous? You take help where you find it. If saints answer you, you are grateful. If herbs protect you, you are grateful. If both work together, even better. You never think of yourself as disobedient, only as practical. You trust God, but you also trust the wisdom of your ancestors. You kneel at the altar, but you also whisper charms over your child. You watch the priest perform rituals that echo your own, and you wonder if perhaps everyone walks the same line, just in different clothes. You live inside that blurred space, where church and magic are not enemies, but companions, each holding out a hand in the darkness. And you take both hands, because life is fragile, and survival requires all the help you can gather. You live in an age when knowledge itself feels like a kind of enchantment. Most people in your village cannot read, but if you step inside the stone walls of a monastery or travel to the rising universities of Paris, Bologna, or Oxford, you find a world where ink and parchment are treated with almost sacred awe. To hold a book is to hold power, and in these books, written in the crisp lines of Latin or translated carefully from Arabic, you encounter ideas that seem to blur the line between science, faith, and magic. If you are one of the few who can read, you do not separate these categories the way later centuries will. For you, knowledge is a spectrum, and at one glowing edge of that spectrum lies what you and others call natural magic. Imagine you are a student, bent over a heavy manuscript by candlelight. The pages smell of parchment and soot, and on them are drawn careful diagrams of the heavens. You learn that the stars and planets are not random, but ordered, moving with divine precision. Their positions when you are born are said to shape your character, your fortune, even your soul. You do not think of this as superstition. You think of it as the language of God written across the night sky. If scripture is his word, then the heavens are his handwriting. To read the stars is not to disobey him, but to come closer to his design. Astrology becomes a practical tool. If you are a king, you consult astrologers before declaring war, asking whether Mars burns favourably in the sky. If you are a noblewoman, you ask when the stars align for a safe pregnancy. If you are a merchant, you check the heavens before setting out on a journey. And if you are a student, you calculate horoscopes, not to defy God, but to glimpse the secret patterns he has woven into creation. Priests may warn you not to overstep, but even they admit that the sun and moon clearly influence tides, seasons, and crops. Why not human lives too? Beside astrology lies alchemy. You have heard tales of those who spend their lives before furnaces, heating metals until they sweat and transform. The goal is said to be the philosopher's stone, a substance so perfect it can turn base metals into gold and cure any illness. But alchemy is more than greed for riches. It is also an attempt to understand the hidden structures of the world, to pierce the veil between matter and spirit. If everything God made contains divine order, then metals are not fixed but evolving, moving slowly toward perfection. Gold is simply the end of that journey, and perhaps with skill you can help it along. If you peer into the workshop of an alchemist, you see strange vessels bubbling, powders ground into fine dust, liquids poured carefully through filters. To you, it feels like a mix of craft, prayer, and mystery. The alchemist mutters invocations as he works, asking for divine guidance, invoking not demons, but the harmony of creation. He may fail again and again to find the philosopher's stone, but along the way he discovers medicines, distillations, dyes, and techniques that heal the sick and enrich daily life. You cannot always tell where experiment ends and spell begins, because to you, they are part of the same quest. And then there are the grimoires. These are books whispered about in corridors, hidden in locked chests, passed quietly from one hand to another. Written in Latin, Greek, or Arabic, they contain recipes for summoning angels, binding spirits, healing wounds, or seeing the future. Some grimoires are full of prayers and psalms rearranged into protective charms. Others include diagrams of circles, sigils, and names said to command invisible forces. If you are lucky enough, or daring enough, to glimpse one, you feel the weight of forbidden knowledge. You are not sure whether you hold wisdom or danger, and yet the temptation to read is powerful, because you believe knowledge itself is a kind of key, and even locked doors in the universe might open if the right words are spoken. Scholars debate constantly about what is safe, what is holy, what is forbidden. Natural magic, which studies the hidden powers of herbs, stones, and stars, is often tolerated. After all, God created these things, so to uncover their properties is to glorify him. But necromancy, the art of summoning spirits and commanding them, is seen as perilous, for it seems too close to calling upon demons. Yet even here, the lines blur. One student might copy a formula that calls upon angels, while another copies one that asks the same angel to force a demon into obedience. Both think they are uncovering the laws of creation. Both think they are, in their way, faithful. If you are part of this world, you learn that words themselves carry power. A prayer written out and folded into a locket becomes a shield. A name spoken at the right time of night can bring dreams or visions. The alphabet of Hebrew, the geometry of Greek, the patterns of Latin, all are said to contain mysteries hidden since the dawn of creation. You begin to see language as more than communication. It is a tool, a spell, a bridge between the human and the divine. To copy words carefully onto a page is not only scholarship, it is ritual. Even the church cannot fully resist. Popes and bishops hire astrologers to choose the best day for coronations or journeys. Monasteries preserve ancient texts on the movements of stars, the properties of stones, the hidden virtues of plants. Some theologians write that all of nature is a book written by God, waiting to be read by those with patience and humility. And so you, as a student or a cleric, may spend long nights trying to decipher that book, your eyes red with exhaustion, your fingers smudged with ink, your mind hovering between devotion and enchantment. You do not call yourself a magician, you call yourself a seeker of knowledge. And yet, in the eyes of some, your work is indistinguishable from sorcery. If you cure an illness with an herb, are you practicing medicine or magic? If you calculate the movement of Venus and declare a safe time for childbirth, are you honoring God's order or defying his will? If you heat metals in a furnace and whisper a prayer for their transformation, are you a scientist or an alchemist? In truth, you are all of these at once, because the categories do not exist separately in your time. They are threads of the same tapestry. Imagine yourself holding a polished stone, said to protect against nightmares. You believe it because a scholar wrote it in a book, citing Aristotle or Pliny. You also believe it because your grandmother once tied a similar stone above your bed. Learned knowledge and folk wisdom meet in your hands, and you do not distinguish between them. The authority of a philosopher and the memory of family tradition are both convincing. You carry the stone, whisper a psalm before sleep, and feel safe. To you, this is not contradiction, it is harmony. In this learned world of magic, danger always hovers near. You know of men accused of summoning demons in candle-lit chambers, of scholars imprisoned for copying forbidden texts, of students whispered about as necromancers. You fear what could happen if curiosity strays too far, and yet you cannot resist the pull of discovery. Every new manuscript feels like a glimpse into God's workshop. Every new diagram of the stars feels like a secret map. Every failed experiment still holds the promise that one day you might unlock the hidden forces of the cosmos. And so you live in a time when knowledge itself is a kind of sorcery, when books are as precious as relics, when the line between science, religion, and magic has not yet been drawn. You are both scholar and dreamer, both faithful and daring, both obedient and curious. You study the heavens, the metals, the words, the hidden properties of the world, not to rebel against God, but to draw nearer to his mysteries. And in those long nights, hunched over parchment by flickering light, you feel that perhaps you are not only reading about creation, perhaps, in some small way, you are touching the secret threads that hold it together. You live in a world where the boundary between safety and danger is fragile, where unseen forces seem to press against you every day. For generations, you and your neighbors have whispered charms, worn herbs, and trusted in small rituals to protect your lives. These practices feel natural, inherited, essential. But slowly, across the centuries, something begins to shift. The whispers of comfort grow into whispers of suspicion. What once felt like wisdom begins to look, in the eyes of others, like danger. And without realizing it, you find yourself in a world where the very same gestures that once kept your family safe might one day mark you as a servant of the devil. At first, it seems like nothing changes. You still hang protective herbs over doorways, still mutter blessings over bread, still slip charms into the hands of frightened mothers. The church still tolerates many of these things, even blesses water, oil, and salt in ways that mirror your own practices. But you start to notice a sharper tone in sermons. Priests speak more often of heresy, of false teachings, of hidden enemies among the faithful. You hear tales of groups like the Cathars in the south of France, accused of twisting the gospel and worshipping the devil in disguise. You hear of trials, of burnings, of entire communities condemned. And in those stories, you sense the beginnings of a new way of seeing the world, a world in which everyday practices might be recast as proof of corruption. You begin to feel that danger no longer comes only from illness or storms or bad harvests. Danger now comes from the suspicion of your neighbours. If your cow dies suddenly, someone might whisper that you cursed it. If your remedies heal too well, someone might say you used forbidden power. If you mutter words too strange, too old, someone might decide they do not sound like prayers, but like spells. The same acts that once marked you as helpful might now mark you as dangerous. And in a society where fear runs deep, being seen as dangerous can mean death. The Inquisition grows during these centuries, first focused on rooting out heresy among intellectuals and dissident groups. But suspicion is a hungry thing, and it spreads. If some people can secretly deny Christ while pretending to be faithful, then perhaps others can secretly call on demons while pretending to heal. You hear of books written by learned clerics that describe witches meeting in the night, flying through the air, feasting with the devil. These stories sound strange to you, almost unbelievable, but they begin to circulate, carried by rumour and reinforced by authority. Over time, they create a shadow world that feels more real with every telling. When plague strikes, fear multiplies. You remember the Black Death, or you hear the stories from those who lived through it. Entire villages gone, entire families wiped out, priests unable to bury the dead quickly enough. People demand an explanation. Some blame the wrath of God, others blame Jews, lepers, or foreigners. But beneath those accusations, another thought grows. Perhaps unseen human agents, witches, have poisoned the air, cursed the waters, spread death by secret means. Fear seeks a target, and suspicion provides one. You also notice that women are increasingly the focus of these suspicions. Wise women, midwives, healers, the very ones who for centuries carried the knowledge of herbs and remedies, begin to look like threats in the eyes of male clerics and judges. Their power is too independent, their authority too separate from the church, and so the skills that once earned respect begin to draw accusations. If you are a woman in this time, you might find your knowledge of childbirth or healing suddenly recast as sorcery. If you are a man, you might see your wife, sister, or neighbour questioned for the very skills your family depends upon. The language of demonology takes root. Learned authors insist that witches do not simply mutter charms or curse cows, but enter into pacts with the devil himself. They write that witches renounce Christ, kiss demons, and gather at night in Sabbaths of feasting, flying through the skies on broomsticks. You might never have seen such a thing, and you might doubt anyone who claims to, but the power of written words, copied and circulated, makes these images seem authoritative. They seep into the imagination until people begin to see them even where they are not. By now, the world feels changed. To practice a charm is no longer harmless. It is suspect. To heal with herbs is no longer simply medicine. It is a potential crime. To dream of power outside the church is no longer innocent curiosity. It is flirtation with the devil. You live in a time where categories harden, where grey shades become black and white. The blending of church ritual and folk practice that once felt natural is now dangerous. The tolerance that once allowed you to cross yourself at a crossroads or hang a protective charm on your child's cradle is shrinking. Every act must be justified. Every practice must be defended. You feel the tension when you look at your neighbours. Once you shared charms freely, offered advice, blessed children, muttered rhymes without fear. Now you hesitate because you wonder what they might think, what they might repeat. You feel the tension in yourself too, when you touch a relic in church and wonder whether it is truly different from the stone your grandmother once gave you to ward off nightmares. You do not see the difference, but you know others now insist it exists, and in their eyes that difference could be the line between safety and fire. What frightens you most is how quickly suspicion spreads. One accusation becomes 10, and soon an entire community might stand against a single person. You think of stories where confessions are forced through torture, where names are extracted, where chains of accusations grow until dozens are pulled into the net. You fear how fragile your place in this society has become. It no longer matters only what you do, but what others believe you do. Reputation itself has become life or death. And yet, you cannot entirely abandon the old ways. The world is still dangerous. Children still sicken, crops still fail, storms still rise. You still feel safer with charms and whispered prayers. You still trust the herbs that have worked for centuries. You still believe in the hidden forces that shape the world. The difference is that now you must be more careful, more secret. What was once public becomes private. What was once shared becomes hidden. What was once ordinary becomes forbidden. You sense that the seeds have been planted for something darker yet to come. The stories grow more vivid, the sermons more harsh, the punishments more severe. You do not yet live in the age of great witch hunts. That storm belongs to the future. but you feel the wind rising. You hear the first whispers of the devil's conspiracy, of the need to purify communities, of the hidden Sabbaths in the woods. These ideas, once strange, are becoming familiar. And when ideas become familiar, they shape reality. You live at the edge of that transformation. You stand in the space between tradition and persecution, between the comfort of old charms and the terror of new accusations. You are still the same person, doing the same things, trusting the same powers. But the gaze of your world has shifted. The same herbs in your hands, the same words on your lips, no longer mean what they once did. And that is the most frightening change of all, that your intentions matter less than the story others choose to tell about you. In the silence of the night, when you hold your child close and whisper a charm to keep away illness, you feel both the comfort of tradition and the chill of fear. You are not thinking of demons. You are not serving the devil. You are doing what people have always done, trying to keep your family alive. But the world around you is no longer willing to see it that way. The seeds of suspicion have been sown, and you know that in time they will grow into fire. And just as they trusted in charms to ward off spirits or illness, they also turned to strange recipes and secret mixtures to shape how they looked. After all, beauty itself could be a kind of magic, whether it came from powdered herbs, crushed minerals, or remedies that today might horrify you. You stand in a candlelit chamber, the kind where the rushes on the floor are scattered with herbs to keep the air sweet, and the windows are draped with heavy cloth to protect delicate skin from the rawness of daylight. If you lived in medieval Europe, you would know one thing with absolute certainty. Your face is your fortune, and in a world where wealth and nobility are displayed not only in land and titles but in the flesh itself, the ultimate symbol of refinement is not jewels or silks, but skin as pale as ivory, smooth as polished bone, untouched by the sun that marks the labourer and the peasant. You would spend hours, days, even years trying to cultivate it. Imagine being told from the moment you were old enough to glance in a polished piece of metal that your worth could be measured in the whiteness of your skin. Brownness meant toil, meant sweating in fields, meant exposure to the sun's harsh glare. But whiteness, ghostly pallor, that meant nobility, leisure, a life indoors where others laboured for you. So you would begin to learn the little tricks, the whispered secrets, the household recipes passed down from mother to daughter, from mistress to maid, sometimes dangerous, sometimes gentle, always aimed at transforming flesh into marble. One of your first allies would be the simplest of things: milk. A warm bath filled with it, if you could afford such extravagance, promised to soften your skin. Curdled milk smeared across the face at night was said to smooth rough patches, to eat away blemishes with its quiet sourness. The tang would cling to your skin, and in the morning, rinsing it away with rosewater, you would feel softer, fresher, closer to the vision of perfection whispered in courtly songs. Honey, too, was treasured, sticky and golden, spread in a thin sheen that dried into a mask. When peeled away, it promised to draw out impurities. These were the gentler paths, the natural paths, the ones a cautious girl might rely on if she feared harsher remedies. But not everyone was cautious. If you wished to stand out, to dazzle, to compete with the painted ladies at court, you would turn to powders and concoctions crafted with substances that whispered danger even as they promised beauty. The most common ingredient was white lead, ground into fine dust and mixed with vinegar or egg whites into a paste that clung to the skin like porcelain. The effect was immediate and dazzling, a face pale, radiant, ethereal under candlelight. For a night, you could pass for the very embodiment of refinement, but you would feel the sting after, the tightness, the cracks forming like tiny fissures. You would not yet know the toll such substances took, how they sank into flesh, poisoned blood, eroded health. You would only know that beauty was worth it, that rivals looked on you with envy, that men praised your unearthly fairness. And so you would keep applying, keep layering, keep hiding the tiny flaws of nature beneath a mask of alchemy. Some women used mercury preparations too, brighter and harsher than lead. They promised to strip away freckles, to scour the face until it gleamed white as a moonlit bone. Imagine the burn as the mixture bit into skin, the way flesh would peel, flake, redden, then pale again. You would suffer gladly, because every mark of pain was proof you were willing to fight for beauty. In an age when mirrors were rare and precious, you might glimpse only distorted fragments of yourself in polished metal. but you would feel the admiration of others, like a mirror held up to your soul. There were safer recipes, but they were slower, subtler. You might grind almonds into paste, mixing them with honey or vinegar, smearing them across your cheeks to soften them. You might steep herbs in vinegar or wine, rosemary, sage, or lavender, and dab them onto your skin as a tonic. Egg whites, beaten into froth, dried into a tightening film that smoothed and stiffened the face, a kind of primitive facelift. The sensation was strange, a mask cracking when you smiled, but the effect was luminous, glistening, a signal that you took care of yourself. You would not call these things cosmetics. You would call them remedies, secrets, gifts of nature. Your household might also have books of secrets, little compendiums of recipes blending herbal wisdom, folk practice, and alchemical daring. These would tell you to crush pearls into powder to brighten the face if you were rich enough. They would tell you to rub your skin with bread soaked in wine, to mix pigeon dung with vinegar as a spot treatment, to smear goose fat over wrinkles to soften them. You would wrinkle your nose at the strangeness. Yet still, when alone, you might try, because beauty demanded experimentation. Some of these recipes worked by simple moisture, others by mild acids, others by sheer illusion. The cultural pressure around you would be relentless. Poets would sing of ladies with skin whiter than lilies, whiter than snow, whiter than polished ivory. Artists would depict noble women with complexions smooth and pale, untouched by blemish. You would glance in the mirror of water in a basin and compare yourself to these ideals, wondering if your freckles could ever be erased, if your slight redness from the sun could ever be subdued. And each time you doubted, you would return to your jars and pots, your powders and creams, because what was at stake was not vanity alone, but status, respect, admiration. Imagine the ritual of it. Early morning, you would rise before the household stirs, gather your mixtures, and begin the work. You would wash your face with cool water, perhaps scented with rose or violet. You would smear on your chosen preparation, whether almond paste or lead white paste, and wait. You would sit, candle flickering, feeling the mask harden, your skin pulling tight, the smell of vinegar sharp in your nose. When you washed it away, you would feel reborn. If you used powder, you would pat it carefully, layering paleness until your natural tones were gone. You would check the corners of your eyes, the curve of your jaw, making sure no betraying blush of human warmth remained. Only perfection. Yet perfection came at a cost. You would begin to feel weakness sometimes, headaches, trembling in the hands. Your skin might thin, scar, erupt in sores. But you would hide it, layer more powder, because in a world where beauty was tied to worth, admitting weakness was worse than suffering. And around you other women would be doing the same, competing silently, painfully, all bound by the same cruel standard. And if you were lucky enough to be born with naturally pale skin, you would still guard it fiercely. You would avoid the sun as though it were poison. You would carry parasols, wear veils, cover yourself in layers, never letting the coarse touch of daylight undo what you had cultivated. You would envy the men less, for they could walk in the sun without shame, but you would not trade places, because to be pale, smooth, luminous was to wield power in your own way. This was not vanity in the shallow sense you imagine now. This was survival in a different key, where marriages were arranged, alliances forged, fortunes made, and your skin was a visible currency. Every blemish, every freckle, every darkening from the sun was a deduction from your worth. So you would endure the sting of vinegar, the poison of lead, the burn of mercury, the stench of animal fat, because you knew the world watched. You knew skin was not flesh, but a canvas on which society painted its ideals, and you were both the artist and the victim. And so, night after night, morning after morning, you would repeat the cycle, caught between natural remedies and dangerous alchemy, chasing the impossible dream of becoming ivory, of becoming snow, of becoming a living statue of purity. You wake in the dim glow of a single candle, and as you lean toward the polished metal mirror, you notice how much power your eyes hold. In medieval Europe, when words like seduction and mystery were whispered in corners of courts and cloisters alike, the eyes were not merely windows to the soul, they were weapons, charms, subtle spells cast in glances. If you were to live then, you would be taught that beauty lies not only in the ivory smoothness of skin, but in the darkness of lashes, the arch of brows, the wideness of a high forehead, and so you would begin the delicate rituals of shaping and colouring, plucking and staining, each act as much about social standing as about desire. Imagine your brows first. They frame your face, but in your age, a heavy brow is not admired. To be fashionable, you must have fine, arched brows, delicate as brush strokes. Too thick, and you risk looking coarse, rustic, even animal-like. So you would sit before your mirror, a small pair of tweezers or a thin knife in hand, and you would pluck, hair by hair, day after day. The pain would be sharp, your eyes watering, but you would continue until your brows narrowed into a soft arc, refined, elegant, befitting a lady who spends her time in halls and chambers, not in fields. And then there were the lashes. Long, dark lashes meant allure, meant mystery, meant a gaze that lingered. Yet nature rarely gave them generously. You would learn little tricks, moistening them with oils, brushing them with soot or powdered antimony mixed with fat. Some concoctions would sting, irritate, but they made your lashes glisten, darken, lengthen. You would feel the heaviness, the weight of them, and you would practice fluttering your gaze just so. A look cast through long lashes could suggest virtue, shyness, or something far more dangerous, depending on the tilt of your head. And in a society where you had little overt power, the smallest tilt, the subtlest glance, could move hearts or change fortunes. But perhaps strangest of all was the forehead. In your world, beauty demanded not only whiteness of skin and delicacy of brow, but a high, smooth, expansive forehead. The larger and clearer, the better. It was thought to make the face noble, refined, almost angelic, and so women plucked the hairline itself, pulling strands from temples and scalp until the forehead seemed to stretch high above the brows. Some would even shave, not fully, but just enough to push the hairline back, creating the illusion of a vast, glowing dome. You would sit in your chamber, a small knife in hand, scraping away hairs inch by inch, wincing at the sting, but thrilled when you saw your forehead gleaming broad and pale in candlelight. Eyes themselves could also be enhanced. A sparkle, a gleam, could be coaxed from them with tricks. You might rub a little wine into your lids, or even a drop of belladonna, deadly nightshade, into the eyes to dilate the pupils, making them look wide, dark, entrancing. It would sting, blur your vision, perhaps even make you dizzy, yet the effect, that sudden widening of the gaze, would be worth it. Your eyes would look softer, fuller, more mysterious. You would know you were playing with danger. Belladonna could blind, could poison, but you would also know that beauty was never safe, that its cost was always risk. There were gentler ways too. Rosewater, cooled in silver basins, could be used to wash the eyes, to reduce redness, to bring clarity. Women would whisper that pearls dissolved in vinegar and dabbed at the corners of the eyes brought brightness, though few could afford such extravagance. Herbs like fennel or chamomile steeped in water could soothe weary eyes after nights of candlelit sewing or courtly watching. You would prepare such washes, dip cloths, rest them upon your closed lids, feeling relief, feeling the cool seep into tired flesh. The cultural expectations pressing upon you would be merciless. In songs and poems, the beloved's eyes are always compared to stars, to pools, to shining gems. They are not dull, not red, not tired. They are luminous, and so you would labour to make yours shine, even when your body ached, even when the sleepless nights left you hollow. The illusion of brightness had to be preserved, and each morning, when you plucked your brows again, when you rubbed your lashes with soot, when you widened your forehead with careful scraping, you were not simply grooming, you were building an image, a mask, a performance for the world. Men, of course, did not suffer the same. They might trim, they might wash, but their foreheads were not judged, their lashes not measured, their brows not plucked until raw. It was you, the woman, who bore the burden, who bent under the unspoken command that beauty was duty. If you were plain, it was seen as a failing. If you were careless, it was a weakness. And so you persisted, in silence, shaping your face not into what you wanted, but into what was demanded. Picture yourself preparing for a feast. You rise early, the hall buzzing with servants preparing meats and spiced wine, music being rehearsed in corners. You retreat to your chamber and begin your ritual. First the hairline, you pluck and smooth until your forehead gleams broad and bare. Then the brows, arched delicately, dusted with a faint trace of soot for emphasis. Then the lashes, dabbed with oil and lamp black until they glisten in the light. Finally, a drop in your eyes, perhaps rosewater if you are cautious. belladonna if you are daring. You dress in silks, your face framed not by wild nature, but by hours of crafted perfection. You descend to the feast, and as men glance at you across the hall, their eyes linger. They see not the pain of plucking, not the sting of poison, but only refinement, allure, mystery. You smile faintly, and your lashes lower, and the game continues. This was the reality of your time. Beauty carved, plucked, shaped, shadowed. Your eyes and brows, your very hairline, were not natural gifts, but canvases you reshaped again and again, because society demanded a specific script, and you played it with your own flesh. And though you may one day look back, rubbing your aching forehead, your reddened eyes, you would know you had performed your role. In a world where power was denied you in so many ways, at least here, with brows and lashes and a forehead like polished ivory, you could command attention, admiration, and perhaps a fragment of influence. You lean close to the polished metal of your mirror, tilting your face so that the candlelight strikes just right, and you notice what others will notice first when you smile, when you laugh, when you whisper at the edge of a hall, your mouth. In medieval Europe, the lips were not only instruments of speech and prayer, but symbols of beauty, sensuality, and refinement, and what you did to shape them, colour them, soften them, was as much an art as painting or weaving. You would not have the ready powders and rouges of later centuries, no lipstick in its neat tube, no neat little pot of balm. You would have to make do with nature, with what was around you, with tricks whispered from mother to daughter, from maid to mistress. And what you could create might delight or it might poison. Imagine yourself there, in a world where pale skin was prized, but lips were expected to stand out just enough to glow faintly against the whiteness of your powdered face. A bloodless mouth would mark you as sickly, unattractive, unloved. So you would begin with colour. Crushed berries, strawberries, raspberries, mulberries would be mashed into a paste, their juices staining your fingertips as you rubbed them into your lips. The colour would not last long, but for an hour or two it would lend your mouth a flush of youth, the illusion of health and desire. If berries were scarce, you might try red wine, dabbing it with cloth, letting it soak in. Some women even used roots, like madder, boiled and strained, to leave a stronger, almost scarlet tint. You would press the juice into your lips, feeling them sting, feeling the taste of earth or wine linger, and then you would smile, knowing the colour made you seem more alive, more magnetic. But colour alone was not enough. Softness mattered too. A cracked, chapped mouth would be seen as ugly, even shameful, as though you had failed to care for yourself. And so you would make balms from what you had. Beeswax melted and mixed with animal fat, perhaps scented with rose or lavender. You would rub it in with your finger, coating your lips in a thin layer that gleamed in the candlelight. Goose fat was common too, or even butter, though its smell was heavy. Some whispered that rubbing honey into your lips not only softened them, but made them taste sweet to anyone who dared to kiss you. Whether you believed it or not, you would try, licking the honey away slowly, enjoying its stickiness, its quiet seduction. The shape of your lips mattered as well. A small bow-like curve was admired, delicate, gentle, not too wide, not too thick. But you could not change your shape, only exaggerate or disguise it. If your lips were thin, you might rub a little berry stain wider than their natural line, creating the illusion of fullness. If they were too full, you might keep them pale, powdered even, to minimize their prominence. Each choice said something about you, not in words, but in whispers of appearance, subtle codes of attraction and modesty. To those who knew how to read them, your lips became a secret language. And then there were the teeth. You might smile with care, for the teeth of your world were rarely perfect. They chipped, decayed, yellowed quickly, especially in the mouths of the poor who could not afford constant care. But among the wealthy, there were tricks. Charcoal, ground into powder, could be rubbed with cloth along the teeth, scrubbing away stains, leaving them whiter. Salt was used too, coarse crystals scouring enamel, though it left gums raw. If you were lucky enough to have access to sage leaves, you could chew them, letting their oils clean and sweeten your mouth. Some women even rubbed crushed rosemary or mint into their gums, hoping not only to freshen their breath, but to protect against rot. Yet dangers lurked here as well. Some tooth powders contained ground alabaster or pumice, harsh abrasives that wore teeth down to nothing over time. Others mixed honey into the powders, which sweetened the taste but fed decay. You might not know that every scrub, every polish was slowly destroying the very enamel you sought to protect, but you would continue anyway because blackened teeth were considered ugly, a sign of neglect, even sin. A bright smile, even if imperfect, could elevate you, could make you seem healthy and clean in a world where disease was everywhere. And then, the most intimate of all concerns, your breath. For what good were rosy lips and polished teeth if the air that came from your mouth soured the moment you spoke? In your world, where spices were precious and perfumes costly, you would do what you could. You might chew fennel seeds or parsley, their green oils freshening the mouth. Cloves, if you could afford them, were prized not only for their fragrance but for numbing toothache, a double blessing. In markets, sellers offered little balls of pressed herbs, gums, and honey to suck, both as medicine and as breath sweeteners. You might carry one with you, tucked in cloth, pressing it to your tongue before entering a hall or church, ensuring your words carried not staleness, but sweetness. There were stranger remedies too. Some women believed rinsing the mouth with wine kept it fresh and clean, though it often only masked the problem. Others steeped cinnamon in water, creating a rinse that burned but left fragrance. In wealthier circles, concoctions of pearls dissolved in vinegar were whispered to cleanse both teeth and breath, though such extravagance was almost mythical. For you, more likely, it would be rosemary boiled in water, mint rubbed on gums, sage chewed at night, small rituals repeated endlessly, because neglect would mean ridicule. And beneath all this was fear, the fear of losing teeth altogether. In a time before dentists as you know them, when pain could mean endless suffering, a toothache was dreaded more than many wounds. Extraction, done by a barber surgeon with iron tongs, was brutal, bloody, and final. You would pray to St. Apollonia, patron of teeth, to spare you such agony, lighting candles at her altar, whispering promises. Each time your gums bled as you rubbed them with salt, each time you felt a twinge deep inside a molar, you would wonder if your prayers were enough. Picture yourself now, preparing for a gathering. You have already whitened your face, plucked your brows, widened your forehead. Now you turn to your lips. You crush a handful of berries, their juice staining your nails red, and you press the liquid onto your mouth until it glows with colour. You rub in a thin sheen of beeswax, making them gleam faintly. Then you chew a sage leaf, rolling its bitterness over your tongue, hoping it hides the taste of last night's ale and salted fish. You smile at your mirror, testing. Your teeth, rubbed with charcoal earlier, look faintly cleaner, though not perfect, but it will do. You tilt your head, lower your lashes, part your lips just slightly. The illusion is complete. And when you walk into the hall, men will notice not the honey you smeared, not the salt you scrubbed with, not the berry juice staining your fingers. They will notice only the shimmer of your mouth, the soft curve of your lips, the faint flush of life in a face otherwise pale and powdered. They will lean closer as you speak, drawn in by your sweetness, and if you laugh, the glimpse of white teeth will seal the impression. You will have turned the mundane, the daily rituals of plucking, crushing, chewing, rinsing, into something that bends attention, that holds power, however fleeting. This was your world, your truth. Lips that bled with berry juice, teeth scraped raw by salt, breath masked by herbs, pain and risk hidden beneath sweetness and glow. Every smile was a performance, every kiss a careful preparation, every word spoken only after hours of unseen labour. And though you might one day look in the mirror and see the cracks, the wear, the scars of your efforts, you would know that for each moment you stepped into the hall with your mouth glowing like a rose and your teeth gleaming faintly in candlelight, you had done what was demanded. Beauty was never free, and your lips, your teeth, your very breath bore the cost. You wake in the morning, and before you even step into the bustle of your day, you know the truth of your world. Your skin will speak louder than your words. People will read your health, your status, even your virtue in the colour and texture of your face. To be pale was to be noble, to be delicate, to be above the sun-scorched labour of the fields. And so you begin your slow daily work, crafting not only the face you will wear, but the scent that will follow you. The little traces of luxury or desperation clinging to you as strongly as any perfume. Your skin, first of all, is both your pride and your worry. It is not smooth by default, not glowing by miracle, but marked by life, spots, scars, redness, rough patches. In the medieval imagination, these things were not only cosmetic but moral. A blemish might hint at sin, a boil might suggest corruption, a freckle might whisper of peasant blood. You learn to cover, to soothe, to disguise. If you are wealthy, you may wash your face with rose water, steeped carefully in the petals gathered at dawn. The soft fragrance lingers, the cool liquid calms irritation. If you cannot afford roses, you might settle for herbs. Chamomile boiled in a pot, then cooled, splashed onto the cheeks with hands roughened by work. You would pat your skin dry with linen if you are lucky, or with wool if that is all you own. Already you know that each step marks your place in the world. Whitening comes next, for pale skin is the standard of beauty pressed into you since childhood. You grind lead-based powders if you are bold, rubbing them onto your face until your skin gleams unnaturally white, though you risk sickness, slow poisoning that creeps into your bones. Some women know this, whisper about deaths blamed on beauty, yet continue anyway, for what choice is there if pale perfection brings admiration? If you are cautious, you turn instead to flour, or crushed eggshells mixed with vinegar, a lighter powder that clings only briefly. Sometimes chalk is ground and applied, though it cakes in damp weather, cracking across the skin like plaster on a wall. Still, you try, because without it your natural tone betrays you, making you seem common, exposed to the sun. And if the whiteness is not enough, you seek smoothness. Almond oil rubbed in carefully can soften if you can afford almonds. Otherwise, lard mixed with herbs might do, greasy though it feels. Honey is rubbed as a mask, sticky on your cheeks, pulling impurities away when rinsed with warm water. Some say milk baths soften the skin, though that is more fantasy than reality for most. Who can waste milk when children need it? You content yourself with small rituals, pressing butter into your cheeks to keep them supple in winter, sprinkling oat flour onto irritated skin in summer. These are your secrets, your daily negotiations with nature. But what of imperfections that cannot be smoothed away? Spots, scars, pocks left from childhood fevers or the dreaded pox. You cover them with more powder, thick layers that dull the redness. Or you take tinctures, believing they will cure from within. Vinegar with herbs, garlic mixed into wine, foul tasting but hopeful. You whisper prayers to saints, St. Roch or St. Anthony, begging for clear skin as much as for salvation. Each morning you glance in your polished mirror, squinting at the candlelit reflection, and adjust. There is no rest for the face that must be beautiful. And then there is scent, the invisible veil you wear. In crowded halls, in smoky taverns, in the stench of unwashed streets, how you smell can elevate you or drag you down. To smell sweet is to show refinement, wealth, control. If you are rich, you may burn incense at home, letting the smoke cling faintly to your hair and clothes. You may dab musk or civet, imported luxuries, onto your wrists or behind your ears, though their heaviness is not always pleasant. More likely, you rely on herbs. Rosemary boiled in water and poured through your hair, lavender tucked into your bodice, mint rubbed onto your neck. These simple gestures lift you above the odour of sweat and tallow, of fish and earth. Not all scents are pleasant in the making. Some perfumes require animal secretions distilled with flowers, pungent in their preparation. You would wrinkle your nose but endure, for when properly balanced, the result is exotic, intoxicating. Spices too are used, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg if you can acquire them. You might carry a pomander, a small ball filled with herbs and resins, holding it to your nose in public spaces, not only to mask foul odours but to ward off sickness, for scent is thought to protect you from plague itself. With each breath, you draw in not just fragrance but reassurance, the illusion of safety. And beyond skin and scent are the small finishing touches, the little arts that transform you into a vision of ideal beauty. You might redden your cheeks with a faint blush, made from crushed roots or wine, dabbed lightly onto powdered skin. Too much, and you look painted, scandalous. Just enough, and you seem alive, healthy, desirable. Rings on your fingers, carefully chosen, draw attention to your hands. A jeweled pin in your hair catches the light. The way you braid or veil your hair adds to the illusion. High foreheads exposed, veils fluttering with movement, jewels gleaming softly. These are not mere adornments but declarations, telling others who you are, or at least who you wish to appear to be. When you finally step into the world, you carry all of this with you. The whitened face, the softened lips, the carefully freshened breath, the faint herbal scent woven into your clothes. Others may never know the hours of work, the discomfort, the risks. They will only see the pale glow of your skin, the subtle rose at your cheeks, the glimmer of your eyes under the candlelight. They will lean in and catch rosemary and lavender, maybe a trace of clove, and they will imagine refinement, wealth, purity. They will not know of the lead dusted onto your skin, the sores hidden beneath powder, the animal fat rubbed in desperation. They will not smell the sweat beneath the lavender, the fear beneath the sweetness. You will carry the illusion perfectly, because in your world, illusion is survival. And yet, when you return to your chamber and strip away the layers, wiping your face with linen, rinsing your mouth with bitter sage water, combing rosemary sprigs from your hair, you will face your true self in the mirror again. You will see the redness, the cracks, the imperfections, the cost of each trick, and you will know that tomorrow you will begin again, because beauty in your world is not a choice but a necessity, a duty as much as prayer. You will paint and scent and polish yourself not only for others, but for survival, for status, for love, for belonging. And though your skin may weaken, your teeth may wear, your body may sicken from the poisons hidden in powders and balms, you will endure, because to be seen as beautiful is to have power, however fleeting. So when you next imagine a medieval woman stepping into a hall, her face glowing like marble, her scent delicate amidst the stench, her lips red as berries, know that she carries not magic, but labour, not miracle, but craft. She is an artist painting with honey and chalk, a chemist mixing herbs and oils, a priestess whispering prayers over powders and balms. She is every bit the maker of her image, and you, if you were there, would be the same, because in that time, in that place, skin and scent and the smallest touches were not vanity alone, but survival itself. But the line between illusion and reality was always fragile, and nowhere is that more tragic than in the story of the Children's Crusade, where innocence, hope, and belief in miracles collided with the harsh truth of a world that devoured both beauty and faith without mercy. You are standing in a world where crusading has become more than a military endeavour. It is a fever that burns through villages, towns, and cities alike, whispered in sermons, sung in taverns, prayed about in chapels. Decades have passed since the first call to reclaim Jerusalem, and though knights in glittering armour and kings with entire armies have marched to the east, their victories have been fleeting, their failures humiliating. The Holy Land remains distant, locked behind Saracen walls and deserts that chew up men and horses alike. You are a peasant, or perhaps the child of one, growing up in the shadow of sermons that insist you are part of a cosmic struggle, and that heaven itself depends on the zeal of Christendom. You see men return from the east scarred, maimed, or broken in spirit, and you hear the whispers that perhaps the proud warriors have failed because they were too weighed down by sin. It is not strength of arms that God desires, some claim, but purity of heart. And who, after all, is purer than the innocent? Into this charged atmosphere steps a boy, a shepherd named Stephen, barely 12 years old, in the French countryside near Vendôme. You hear tales that he has seen visions, that Christ himself appeared to him disguised as a beggar and gave him a letter for the King of France. The letter, they say, commands that children should march to the Holy Land, for their innocence will succeed where knights have failed. Word spreads like fire in a field of dry wheat. You might not have seen Stephen with your own eyes, but his story reaches you through neighbours, through travellers, through priests both sceptical and shaken. Thousands are drawn to him, and you can almost hear the murmur in the crowd, the awe at the idea that the youngest and weakest have been chosen by God for the holiest of tasks. In Germany, a similar figure rises. Nicholas, a boy leading throngs from the Rhineland, claiming that he too is chosen to guide children to Jerusalem. You imagine the scenes, children leaving their ploughs, dropping buckets of water mid-task, abandoning sheep in the fields, and running barefoot to join the swelling mass. You feel the pull of something immense, a belief that this is no ordinary crusade. These children, unlike hardened knights, do not march for land, for plunder, or for power. They march because they believe God has spoken directly to them, and in their naive courage they embody a kind of faith that adults have long lost. You find yourself caught between wonder and unease. On one hand, the thought of children, barefoot and singing hymns, crossing Europe as living proof of faith is intoxicating. Their purity seems untouchable, their joy contagious. On the other, you cannot help but wonder if this is folly disguised as zeal. Priests warn that these visions may be illusions, that demons love to whisper into innocent ears. Bishops raise eyebrows, some scold, others reluctantly bless, uncertain whether to stamp out the movement or let it burn itself to ashes. But you know how it feels to be poor, to hunger for more than bread. The crusade offers not only salvation but also meaning, a place in the grand story of Christendom, even for those who own nothing. As children gather in towns, they sing psalms and carry crude wooden crosses, their voices rising in chants of Deus lo vult, God wills it. You can picture the streets overflowing with barefoot processions, with little ones clutching each other's hands as though a miracle were inevitable. You feel the collective energy that comes from desperation mingled with hope. Some are peasants' children, others orphans, others older adolescents with a touch of wanderlust. Even the poor and the destitute attach themselves, women, beggars, shepherds, anyone who feels that perhaps the kingdom of God might be reached by simply walking toward it. You sense, too, that these crusades are born of the disillusionment that hangs heavy over Europe. The adult crusaders failed to keep Jerusalem. The last armies returned with tales of horror and shame. People whisper that the knight's greed doomed them. Perhaps then, it is children who must carry the cross. Their very weakness, their helplessness, becomes their armor. To you, it feels like watching a parable unfold in flesh, like the Gospels retold on cobblestone streets, where the meek are not only blessed but mobilized. Yet you cannot ignore the darker undertone. Parents cry as their children vanish. Priests shout that this is madness. Local lords shake their heads as flocks of ragged little ones wander past their estates. You imagine the mothers at the doorways, wringing hands, calling for sons and daughters who will not turn back. You hear the debates in marketplaces. Is this truly God's will or a tragic delusion? Is Stephen touched by heaven or deceived by something else entirely? The more you think, the more the line blurs between miracle and disaster waiting to happen. Still, the image lingers. A river of children winding through Europe, singing, weeping, praying, carrying their innocence like a weapon sharper than any sword. For you, their departure is both a marvel and a warning, a story that will cling to your memory long after the songs fade into silence. And as you watch them go, you feel the tension in your own chest. Part of you wants to follow, to step barefoot onto the road toward Jerusalem, trusting that seas will part before you and angels will scatter your enemies. Another part of you knows that children can starve, that seas remain indifferent, that merchants and kings see innocence as something to be exploited rather than protected. You stand on the edge of history, staring at a procession that may become either the holiest of victories or the cruelest of tragedies. It is in that moment you realize the spark has already been lit. The children's crusade has begun, not in Jerusalem, not even in the East, but here, in the hearts of those too young to know what failure tastes like, too bold to believe in anything less than a miracle, and whether you march with them or watch them vanish on the horizon, you cannot help but feel that the world will never be quite the same again. You step into the throng as the march begins, and at first it feels less like a crusade and more like a festival. Children pour from fields and villages, barefoot and laughing, clutching sticks like swords, scraps of cloth tied into banners, crude wooden crosses carried high above their heads. Their voices rise in hymns, in psalms half remembered from church, in chants of Deus lo vult that echo through narrow streets and rolling hills. You hear the sound of bells in distant chapels ringing as they pass, not in solemn warning, but as though to honour a miracle in progress. The air itself feels charged, humming with expectation, and you cannot help but feel swept along. You walk with them, and the crowd swells around you until you lose sight of where it begins or ends. You are no longer just a child of your own household. You are part of a river of faith flowing toward Jerusalem. At first, the march is intoxicating. Villagers step out of their cottages to gape at the sight, pressing bread into eager hands, pouring out pitchers of water, crossing themselves as though in the presence of angels. You taste that bread, and it feels like communion, not a mere meal, but nourishment touched with holiness. You drink deeply from those jugs, and it feels like baptism, as though you are being washed clean of doubt. You are walking, singing, laughing, alive with the certainty that seas will part before you. Even the older peasants who trudge alongside seem lifted by the joy, their lined faces brightened by the hope that perhaps they have finally stumbled into a story worth telling their grandchildren. But as the days pass, the march sheds its festival skin and reveals its bones. The road stretches longer than you imagined, miles upon miles of mud, cobblestones and dust. Your feet blister, and the songs falter. The laughter thins into silence, then into sobbing in the night. You grow hungry when the bread runs out, thirsty when the rivers are not near. Sometimes villagers welcome you with smiles, but sometimes they slam doors, bolt shutters, and chase the children away with sticks and curses. You see the looks on their faces: disgust, fear, resentment. What seemed to them a holy procession has become, in their eyes, a swarm of beggars consuming everything in its path. Hunger gnaws at you until every step feels like wading through fire. You dream of loaves of bread, of cool wells, of honey cakes once eaten at a feast. When you finally taste a crust given grudgingly by a villager, you chew slowly, letting crumbs dissolve on your tongue, as though they were fragments of heaven itself. You tell yourself that God tests you, that suffering sharpens faith, but there are moments when you wonder if suffering is all there will be. The weather, too, turns against you. Summer heat presses down like a heavy cloak, baking the earth until dust fills your lungs, and your tongue feels like leather. When rain comes, it is not the blessing you prayed for, but a torrent that soaks your ragged clothes, chills your bones, and turns the road into muck. You trudge on anyway, singing through cracked lips, though fewer join in each day. The hymns that once carried across valleys now sound faint, broken, like prayers whispered in fear instead of joy. At night, the march is a chaos of exhaustion. Children collapse on the ground wherever they stand, curled like abandoned bundles, their arms wrapped around each other for warmth. You listen to their shallow breathing, punctuated by coughs, by murmured prayers, by cries for mothers who are no longer near. You feel the weight of your own body sag into the earth, the stones beneath you pressing into your back as though to remind you that the ground does not care how holy your journey is. You close your eyes and dream of Jerusalem glowing on the horizon, but when you wake, it is only more road, more dust, more blisters. Yet the march continues because hope is a stubborn flame. You see faces alight with conviction, children who truly believe they will see the seas part like the Israelites at the Red Sea. Their eyes shine in the darkness, and their certainty kindles your own, even when your stomach clenches in hunger and your shoulders ache from carrying your meagre bundle. The very act of walking feels like prayer, each step a litany, each mile a psalm. You look around and realize that this march is not just about reaching Jerusalem. It is about proving that innocence itself can change the world. But innocence is fragile. Along the way, some fall behind. You watch children stumble, too weak to rise again. You hear their cries fading as the crowd moves forward, and you cannot stop, because if you stop, you too will be lost. Their absence is a shadow on your heart, but the river of bodies carries you forward, and so you learn to keep your eyes fixed ahead, not on the faces vanishing behind you. You tell yourself they are with God now, that their sacrifice is part of the miracle. Still, you cannot shake the sound of their voices from your ears. Occasionally, the march swells again when new villages send more children to join. You watch as boys and girls, wide-eyed and trembling with eagerness, run into the throng, their parents trailing after them in tears. Their presence brings a surge of fresh energy, their unblistered feet and bright voices like a second wind. For a moment, you believe again that you might make it to Jerusalem, that perhaps the sea really will split open for you. But even as these new children join, others disappear, too hungry, too sick, too exhausted. The balance shifts constantly, some gained, some lost, the river forever flowing but never whole. You feel the eyes of townsfolk upon you as the crowd winds through their streets. Some kneel and ask for blessings from the children, convinced they march alongside saints. Others spit, curse, and mutter about foolishness and madness. You see priests stand at crossroads, raising their hands to halt the procession, urging you to return home, warning of doom. Some children weep and obey, turning back with heavy hearts, while others shout defiantly, refusing to believe that God would call them only to abandon them. You feel that defiant surge in your chest, a fire that tells you to keep walking even when your body screams to stop. And so you march, day after day, through mud, through heat, through hunger, through doubt. You march with songs half sung, prayers half believed, and faith half fractured. The journey itself becomes the crucible, burning away comfort, burning away illusion, until only raw belief or despair remains. You do not know which will claim you in the end. Still, when you see the horizon widen, when mountains rise in the distance, or seas glitter faintly beyond the hills, your heart leaps as though the miracle is about to happen. You whisper to yourself that Jerusalem is near, even when it is still hundreds of miles away. You tell yourself that seas part not for armies, but for children, and that you will be there to witness it. And so your feet, blistered and bloodied, keep moving forward, because stopping now would mean admitting that perhaps none of this was ever destined to succeed. And as you walk, you realize the march itself has become Jerusalem. It is no longer about the city far away, but about the faith that keeps you putting one foot in front of the other. Whether seas part or not, you are part of something vast, something desperate, something holy, or at least something that has convinced you it must be holy, because otherwise the suffering is too great to bear. And so, with your throat dry, your stomach hollow, and your heart trembling between hope and despair, you march on into the horizon, still waiting for the miracle to come. You wake one morning expecting to see the horizon as you always have, an endless stretch of road lined with tired feet and pale faces. But something in the air feels different. The songs that once drifted above the march are gone now. There are no psalms whispered through cracked lips, no chants of faith shouted at the sky. What remains is only the sound of trudging, of feet dragging in dust, of coughs rattling from hollow chests. You turn your head and notice how thin the line of marchers has become. Where once there were countless children pressing shoulder to shoulder, now there are gaps, wide as wounds, where no one walks anymore. Those spaces tell their own story, and you cannot help but wonder if you will soon become one of them, swallowed by silence. The dream of Jerusalem still flickers in minds, but it has changed shape. At first, Jerusalem was a city bathed in gold, a place where the seas would split before you, where angels would carry you home. Now it has become something vaguer, more desperate. It is no longer a destination of glory, but simply a hope for rest. You hear children whisper to each other, not about holy wars or seas parting, but about bread, about a bed with real straw, about their mother's arms. When you hear them, you feel the weight of reality pressing in, and you know the march is no longer about saving Jerusalem. It is about surviving long enough to stop walking. You see the toll etched into every body around you. Feet are wrapped in rags soaked through with blood, and the blisters beneath those wrappings fester with every step. Bellies grow hollow, ribs sharp beneath skin, eyes sunken and glassy with hunger. You know what it means when someone collapses now. At the beginning, when a child stumbled, the crowd lifted them back to their feet, carried them if they had to, singing all the louder to encourage them. Now, when someone falls, the march flows around them like water around a stone. No one has the strength to stop. No one can risk wasting their last scraps of energy. You have stepped over too many bodies to count. Some cry out weakly, but more often they lie still, their faces slack, and the march never looks back. The air is heavy with smells you cannot ignore. Sweat, dirt, and unwashed skin cling to every cloak, every tunic. But worse than that are the odours of sickness and death. You notice children coughing blood into the dust, their bodies shaking so violently it seems impossible they can still walk. Others vomit what little they eat or collapse with fevers that burn their skin hot as coals. Disease moves through the crowd like an invisible predator, striking without warning, leaving entire groups too weak to continue. You learn to keep your distance from certain companions, to step aside when you see red on their lips, but no amount of caution protects you completely. At night, you lie awake shivering, wondering if you will feel that same fire in your chest tomorrow. The land itself begins to turn against you. You pass through villages that once greeted you with bread and blessings, but now doors slam shut at the sight of you. Farmers glare as you stumble across their fields, shouting threats, sometimes chasing you with sticks or stones. To them, you are no holy army of God. You are locusts, devouring everything in your path. You taste that hostility in the meagre scraps tossed to you as though you were animals, or in the empty buckets thrust out to drive you away. The world that once seemed to open its arms now shows you its teeth, and each day it becomes harder to believe this was ever a divine calling. Sometimes, though, the cruelty comes not from strangers, but from those who walk beside you. Hunger sharpens desperation into something feral, and you see fights break out over crusts of bread, over a skin of water, even over a dry spot to lie down at night. You watch children claw at one another until their nails leave scratches down gaunt faces, until blood runs from split lips. You see older peasants steal from the very children they swore to protect, justifying it with muttered prayers about survival. You want to believe that faith will keep you above such savagery, but when hunger gnaws through your belly and thirst cracks your lips, you feel the edge of that same desperation inside yourself.